The smartphone screen illuminated my face in the dark bedroom, casting harsh shadows across my features as I stared at the message that had just arrived. 6 words burned into my retinas: "We are moving to Barcelona. Emptied account. Goodbye." My chest constricted as if someone had wrapped a steel band around my ribcage and pulled it tight. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Could only stare at those 6 words as they rewrote my entire future. Against my chest, Vera's tiny body rose and fell with each peaceful breath, blissfully unaware that her grandmother and grandfather had just abandoned us both. The warmth of her small form against me now felt like an anchor pulling me down into uncharted depths. With trembling fingers, I opened the banking app. The shared family fund, the one we'd all contributed to for emergencies, for Brian's recovery, for shared expenses, showed a balance of $0. Not a single cent remained. No explanation beyond those 6 cold words sent to my phone that I'd been checking constantly since Brienne had dropped off Vera 4 days ago. My name is Naomi, I'm 32 and a ceramic artist. This is the story of how I reclaimed what was stolen from me and built something beautiful from betrayal. The shadows in my Arlington apartment seemed to lengthen as I held Vera against me, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around the collar of my shirt. The weight of realization pressed down on me: they had never intended to come back. This wasn't temporary childcare while my sister recovered in Berlin. This was a calculated handoff, a disappearing act with financial sabotage as the parting gift. I should have seen it coming. The pattern had been forming my entire life, thread by invisible thread. Being the reliable one starts so quietly you don't notice the expectations calcifying around you. It begins with small things: picking up Brienne from dance class because mom had a deadline, organizing dad's paperwork because Brienne couldn't focus long enough. Actions that seemed helpful at the time, that made me feel valuable. But dependable had turned into invisible. While Brienne burned bright with drama and demands, tears in restaurant parking lots, midnight crisis calls, a string of abandoned majors before settling on spiritual anthropology, I had become the family's foundation. Unnoticed until I threatened to crumble. The family fund had been established after Brienne's second hospitalization. Just in case someone else needs support, Mom had said, emphasizing someone else, as if to suggest I might someday be worthy of rescue. But I was never someone else. I was the backup system, the contingency plan. The first time Brienne drained the account, it was for a transformative retreat in the Catskills. The second time, for a failed move to Los Angeles to write a memoir she never started. Each time, my parents rushed to her defense: "Don't be so rigid about money, Naomi. Brienne is trying to become." Meanwhile, I patched gaps in my car insurance and postponed new glasses for 2 years. And now here I was, suddenly sole guardian to my sister's 6-month-old daughter, with an empty bank account and a text message goodbye. By day 4 of unexpected single parenthood, my body had adapted to function in 2-hour fragments. Vera's sleep patterns resembled an unsolvable equation: 3 naps of 40 minutes or 1 marathon cry session from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Her lungs were impressively powerful. My nerves were increasingly frayed. I snatched moments to work, editing footnotes for a regional history journal while Vera napped on a folded towel beside my laptop. The client had emailed twice about the deadline. I responded with the understated lie that the delay was due to a family emergency, perhaps the greatest understatement of my life. Every bottle became a negotiation, every diaper change a tactical operation. I bounced her until my arms ached, then rocked her with podcasts playing in my earbuds just to stay conscious. Occasionally, she'd smile at me, toothless and pure, and those moments felt like gulps of oxygen after being underwater. Then she'd scream again, and I'd feel myself fading into the background of my own life, just as I always had. Friends sent check-in texts and occasional memes, but no one actually appeared. I called Brienne twice on her cell phone and left one carefully worded voicemail. I even drafted a third message directly asking when she planned to return, but never sent it. What would be the point? On Thursday morning, after a night of pacing with Vera strapped to my chest while she screamed against my collarbone, I opened my apartment door to collect the mail. A small Tupperware container sat on the stoop, still warm, with a note in precise cursive: "You're doing more than enough." Across the hall, Mrs. Quincy's curtains twitched slightly. She was retired, lived alone, and read mystery novels with her windows open. We'd only spoken once before about trash collection schedules. Later that afternoon, she knocked once, gently, and handed me a folded quilt. "Made it for the wrong-sized bed," she said matter-of-factly, as if this were a business transaction rather than kindness. I thanked her. She didn't ask to come in or stay. It was the first time in days that someone had truly seen me. That night, I sat in the glow of the kitchen light, holding Vera with one arm while spooning reheated stew with the other. My body ached with exhaustion, but for the first time all week, I didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, I went looking for answers. My parents' house still smelled like lemonwood polish and entitlement. I used the spare key they'd given me years ago when I watered their plants during faculty retreats. With Vera dozing in her carrier against my chest, I moved through the kitchen, opening drawers with methodical precision. The refrigerator contained only imported fig jam and half a bottle of Prosecco. The cabinets had been cleared with the sterile efficiency of people who had no intention of returning. In the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of junk mail and a broken corkscrew, I discovered a worn green folder labeled Spain. Inside were printed travel itineraries dating back 6 months, flights, an apartment lease in Barcelona's El Ike sample district, international SIM cards already activated. This wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It was orchestrated. Behind the itineraries lay a notarized document bearing my name, address, and a signature I recognized as a forgery copied from an old lease agreement. Power of attorney for Vera Quinn, age 6 months, transferred to me indefinitely. They had made me her legal guardian without conversation, without consent, without even pretending I had a choice. Tucked into the back of the folder was a printed bank statement from the family account dated 2 weeks before they vanished. A single withdrawal, $21,600. Destination, Meridian Trust, Private International Division. They hadn't just emptied the account, they'd moved the money offshore. I sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd hosted faculty dinners, corrected my posture and ignored my achievements, and stared at the numbers. I should have been furious, should have wanted to destroy something. Instead, I felt a strange stillness. This wasn't a mistake. It was a transaction. They had chosen freedom and offered Vera as the justification. An expensive copper pan on the counter still bore its boutique price tag, $240. They'd left that behind too, along with their responsibilities. Then I found it, a handwritten note tucked beneath the lease documents, folded once, in Brienne's distinctive looping script. Mom, Dad, I can't do this. She's better with Naomi anyway. I'll be in Berlin for a while. Don't wait for me. I carefully collected the documents and placed them in my bag, then looked around the house one final time, as if expecting to find their voices echoing off the walls. But it was quiet, and the quiet offered no apologies. Back home, I laid Vera down, opened my laptop and searched, how to file for emergency guardianship in Virginia. 2 days later, I drove to the legal aid office with all my documentation organized in a folder and Vera secured in her car seat. The legal aid office buzzed with fluorescent lights, and the receptionist barely glanced up from her keyboard. But when Patrick Rosario stepped into the waiting area, tie slightly askew, sleeves rolled up, he greeted me as a person, not a case number. That small humanity nearly broke me. I showed him everything, the forged power of attorney, the bank statements, the travel itineraries, Brienne's note. He read through them deliberately, tapping each page once before speaking. "They didn't notify you?" he asked. "No. They just left." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then this isn't just a guardianship transfer. It's potential financial abandonment, maybe even fraud, depending on how the funds were classified." Patrick explained that while the power of attorney document was technically valid, the deception surrounding it wasn't. If we could demonstrate they had intentionally offloaded responsibility without consent or knowingly misused shared funds, we had grounds to challenge both the custody arrangement and the money trail. I asked what the process would involve. "It'll be slow," he warned. "Tedious. Uphill." "I've been up all night for weeks," I replied. "What's one more climb?" After returning home and putting Vera down for her nap, I began cataloging everything, receipts, screenshots, Brienne's original texts asking me to help out for the weekend, my mother's message about the money. I compiled a detailed spreadsheet, printed multiple copies, labeled everything meticulously. It felt obsessive, but also like I was building something, one documented betrayal at a time. 2 days later, Brienne finally called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted her voice on record. "Naomi," she said, her tone clipped. "You agreed to this." "No, I didn't. You said you needed help for a weekend, not indefinitely." There was silence on the line, then a dry, condescending laugh. "You always dramatize everything." I activated the recording function on my second phone, something Patrick had suggested I do if any of them contacted me. "You think they abandoned you? Grow up. They're done carrying you." I nearly dropped the phone in disbelief. I steadied my voice. "They weren't carrying me. They were hiding behind me. You're being ridiculous, she snapped. It's done. You're not going to scare us with legal threats. I let the silence stretch between us, saying nothing. She hung up. I labeled the recording and backed it up twice. That night, Vera developed a mild fever. I held her against my chest, her breath hot and uneven, watching the ceiling pulse with streetlight shadows. I didn't feel strong or vindicated. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The next morning, I called Patrick and told him I had something he needed to hear. 3 weeks passed as we prepared our legal case. The courts moved surprisingly quickly once Patrick presented evidence of the forged documents and financial irregularities. The message arrived Sunday morning as I was warming a bottle. We are flying back. We want to see Vera. No apology, no explanation, just a declaration, as if they were returning to claim forgotten luggage. I didn't reply. 3 days later, they appeared at my door, Sandra in her designer scarf, Thomas with sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. They looked tanned and rested, the kind of rested only people without responsibilities ever achieve. I opened the door just wide enough for their intentions to hit the threshold and stop there. You look tired, Sandra remarked, brushing past me into my apartment. Still working that part-time job? Thomas followed, arms crossed, eyes already cataloguing my living space for perceived inadequacies. We were surprised you didn't reach out sooner, he said. Thought you'd have questions, but I guess not everyone's cut out for parenting. I remained silent, letting them talk themselves into the trap they'd set. Sandra approached Vera, who sat in her high chair gumming a piece of banana. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Her posture's off. You really should be doing tummy time more consistently. I turned to face them fully. I filed for full custody 3 weeks ago. I've submitted documentation of the bank transfers, the forged power of attorney, and your failure to notify me of intent to leave the country. I also have recorded calls with Brienne confirming I never agreed to long-term guardianship. Thomas's jaw tightened. Naomi, there's no need to escalate. Sandra stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Let's not make this ugly. It's already ugly, I replied evenly. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Neither spoke for a long moment. Sandra's expression hardened with the cold calculation I'd grown up watching. Thomas sighed performatively, disappointment arranged on his face like a carefully chosen accessory. I think it's best we leave, he muttered. I nodded and opened the door. Sandra turned back as she walked out. You've always had a flair for melodrama. I just didn't think you'd drag a baby into it. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I closed the door gently, turned the lock, and exhaled slowly. Vera dropped her banana on the floor and clapped her hands. That afternoon, Patrick called to confirm our court date had been moved up. 2 weeks later, we appeared before the judge. The courtroom smelled of dust and wood polish, everything too bright under fluorescent lights. Patrick walked with quiet certainty, holding our evidence binder like it contained sacred text. I sat beside him, hands folded, watching the judge's expressions more than my parents'. Sandra and Thomas arrived 10 minutes late. Brienne never appeared, despite being formally notified of the proceedings. Patrick began with the timeline. He presented the notarized documents, travel plans dated months in advance, account statements showing funds drained and transferred offshore. Then he played the recordings, Brienne's voice, dismissive and cold, confirming I had never agreed to guardianship. He handed the judge a printed transcript. Sandra cleared her throat repeatedly. Thomas smirked occasionally. They didn't deny the evidence, they attempted to reframe it. My daughter is prone to exaggeration, Sandra said smoothly. She's under tremendous stress. Caring for a child, especially one that isn't hers, is bound to evoke emotional responses. The judge remained impassive. I've reviewed the documentation, she stated, her voice level. What concerns me is not just the abandonment, but the strategic nature of the transfer. Ms. Quinn was misled and left without support, both financially and emotionally. She paused, looking directly at my parents. I'm granting full legal custody to Ms. Naomi Quinn. The offshore account will be frozen pending further review. Any visitation from Sandra or Thomas Quinn must be supervised and approved in advance. Sandra opened her mouth to object. The judge raised a hand. We are done here. As we exited the courtroom and walked down the courthouse steps, wind whipped around us. Sandra intercepted me before I could reach the parking lot. You were always jealous of Brienne, she hissed, voice low and sharp. Even as a child, you waited for a chance to punish us for loving her more. I looked at her but said nothing. She turned away, heels clicking against concrete. Thomas followed silently. I walked to the parking lot where Vera waited with Mrs. Quincy, who had come without being asked. The baby giggled when she saw me, arms reaching upward. That night, rocking Vera to sleep, I realized I hadn't felt relief, just an odd hollow stillness, like the final echo in an empty room. The next morning, I opened my email to find a message from Patrick marked urgent. The account freeze had been approved by the Treasury Department. They were investigating the offshore transfer for potential tax fraud. 6 months later, the case was resolved. The court ordered my parents to return the full amount from the offshore account plus interest. They complied rather than face tax fraud charges. I used the funds to establish a trust for Vera's education and expanded my ceramics studio. As for Brianne, she remained in Berlin and formally relinquished all parental rights to Vera through an international legal proceeding. Our last communication was a brief email where she stated she had no intention of returning to the United States or having further contact with Vera. The divorce from my parents was complete. The kiln hums quietly now, steady and warm. I keep it running at a low temperature most mornings while Vera plays on a quilted mat a few feet away. The cradle I built from reclaimed pine sits near shelves displaying finished ceramic bowls. She naps there sometimes, fingers curled around a fabric doll Mrs. Quincy stitched by hand. My hands have returned to clay. The wheel spins again. I open the studio 2 days a week, 3, when Vera seems settled. Orders come slowly but steadily. The local cafe restocked their shelves with my mugs last month, and a graduate student from Virginia Commonwealth University commissioned a custom set for her thesis exhibition. I take what I can and let the rest go. Mrs. Quincy visits every Friday with oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. She never stays long, just a brief check-in and a gentle squeeze of my arm before she disappears down the sidewalk. Her presence offers its own kind of healing, quiet, dependable, the antithesis of what I was raised to expect from adults. Sometimes I still wake expecting another message, some new twist in the saga. But months have passed and the silence has settled into something I can live with. The legal proceedings are mostly complete. The account remains frozen. There's no word from Brianne. I've stopped waiting. Last week, Vera took her first steps between my workbench and the door. She fell after the third one, then laughed as if it were a game. I laughed too, then cried alone in the kitchen after she fell asleep, not from sadness but because I was the one who witnessed this milestone. She's now 14 months old, growing stronger every day under my care. I wrote Brianne a letter yesterday, not from obligation, but to close a circle. I didn't say much, Vera is safe. That's all that matters. I didn't include a return address. This morning, as I opened the studio and pressed my fingers into damp clay, I surveyed the small cradle beside me, the tiny bowl marked with Vera's thumbprint, the faint streaks of flour on the floor from yesterday's toddler baking attempt. I was left behind so they could escape. But I stayed and built something stronger than what was taken from me. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the dependable one, the backup plan, the one who stayed, share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and building something beautiful from the ruins.